In January 1959, a group of young Soviet hikers left for the northern Ural Mountains. They were not beginners, and this was not a casual trip. They were students, engineers, and experienced hikers who understood cold weather, long routes, and difficult terrain. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a serious and capable young man with experience in the wilderness. The goal was to complete a demanding winter route, return safely, and earn a higher hiking certification. At the start, nothing about the journey seemed unusual. Before they reached the most dangerous part of the route, the group looked relaxed. They smiled for photographs, wrote in diaries, and joked with each other. The surviving images do not show panic or fear. They show ordinary young people starting an adventure. But the mountains ahead were not gentle. The northern Urals in winter were remote, exposed, and brutally cold. Once the group moved deeper into that landscape, help would be far away, and even a small mistake could become serious very quickly. During the early part of the trip, one member became too sick to continue. His name was Yuri Yudin. He turned back before the final mountain section, leaving 9 hikers to continue without him. At the time, it was simply a difficult decision. Later, it became the reason he survived. After Yuri left, the remaining 9 continued deeper into the mountains. The weather became worse as they moved higher. Snow, wind, and poor visibility slowed them down, but they were still functioning as a team, following the route and managing the conditions. Their diaries and photographs suggest normal expedition life. There were cold hands, tired bodies, small jokes, and routine camp work. They were not behaving like people who expected disaster. They were doing what trained hikers do, moving, resting, recording, and continuing. On February 1st, the group reached the slope of Kholat Syakhl. It was an open mountain slope with the forest lower down below them. The place offered little protection from wind, but it was part of the route they were trying to complete. Instead of descending into the trees for better shelter, they set their tent on the open slope. That choice has been discussed for decades. Maybe they wanted to save time. Maybe visibility was poor. Maybe they believed the position was safe enough for one night. Inside the tent, there was no sign that the group expected immediate danger. They had boots, coats, food, maps, tools, and sleeping gear. This matters because whatever happened later forced them away from the very things they needed most. They were not lost, and they were not without supplies. They had reached a planned section of the route, and the group was still together. From the outside, the situation looked difficult, but not desperate. Then, sometime during the night, everything changed. In the darkness, the hikers left the tent suddenly. They went out into freezing weather without proper clothing, without boots, and without the equipment needed to survive long outside. This is the moment at the center of the entire mystery. They did not appear to leave in a normal way. When searchers later found the tent, the canvas had been cut, and the cuts appeared to have been made from the inside. That detail made the scene difficult to understand from the beginning. Inside the tent, many important things were still there. Boots, warm coats, food, and personal belongings had not been taken. It looked less like a planned exit and more like a sudden escape from something the hikers believed was urgent. Some of them left without proper shoes. Some were dressed for the inside of a tent, not for a freezing night on a mountain slope. For trained hikers, that decision only makes sense if staying inside felt even more dangerous. Footprints led away from the tent and down the slope. They did not scatter wildly in every direction. They moved toward the forest below, which suggests the group may have left together, trying to reach shelter among the trees. That detail is important. Whatever happened did not seem to affect only one person. It pushed all 9 hikers away from the tent at nearly the same time. They left behind warmth, equipment, and safety, then walked into the cold. Days passed, and the group did not return. At first, a delay was not impossible. Winter expeditions could run late, especially in difficult mountain weather. But as more time passed, concern grew among friends, families, and the hiking club. By late February, worry had turned into alarm. Search teams were sent into the mountains to find the missing hikers and follow their planned route. What they found would turn a missing person search into one of the most debated mysteries of the Soviet era. On February 26th, searchers found the tent on the slope. It was partly buried in snow, damaged, and empty. The people who had slept there were gone, but almost everything they needed to survive was still inside. Inside the tent, the scene was difficult to understand. Food was still there. Personal items were still there. Shoes and warm clothing had been left behind. It looked as if the hikers had stepped out suddenly, expecting to return quickly, but never did. The searchers began to follow the tracks leading away from the tent. At first, the footprints were clear, moving downhill in a single general direction. But as the distance increased, wind and snow slowly erased them, making the path harder to follow. Near the edge of the forest, under a large cedar tree, they found the remains of a small fire. It was not large, but it showed that at least some of the hikers had reached the trees and tried to stay alive. 2 bodies were found near that cedar tree. They were poorly dressed for the cold, suggesting they had arrived there without enough protection. It looked as if they had survived for some time, but not long enough. Above the fire, several branches of the cedar tree were broken. Some of them were several meters above the ground. This suggests that at least one of the hikers may have climbed the tree, possibly to look back toward the tent. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies. Their positions were spread along the slope, and they appeared to be moving in the direction of the tent when they collapsed in the snow. Among them was Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader. Another was Zenaida Kolmogorova, and another was Rustem Slobodin. None of them reached the tent. They stopped part way, as if the cold had become too strong to overcome. At that point, 5 hikers had been found. 4 were still missing. The search continued through deep snow, but the mountain gave no answers. Weeks passed with no sign of the remaining members of the group. It was not until May, when conditions began to change, that the last 4 were discovered. They were found deeper in the forest, inside a ravine, buried under heavy snow that had hidden them for months. These 4 were dressed differently from the others. Some of them were wearing additional clothing, possibly taken from those who had already died. This suggests that they were trying to adapt and survive longer in the forest. Some of the injuries found on these final bodies were more serious than those found earlier. There were signs of strong internal trauma, but the scene did not clearly point to a typical attack or struggle. This is where the story becomes difficult to explain. Some evidence suggests cold and exposure. Other details seem to suggest something more complex. The 2 ideas do not fit together easily, and that tension is what keeps the case alive. There was no clear sign of another group on the mountain, no extra tracks, no confirmed witnesses, and no direct evidence that someone had approached the tent that night. That makes simple crime explanations difficult to support. At the same time, the condition of the tent and the way the hikers left it raised serious questions. It did not look like a normal decision made by experienced people who felt fully in control of the situation. The official investigation eventually closed the case. It concluded that the hikers died because of a powerful natural force, but the report did not clearly define what that force was, and that vague phrase left space for doubt. Because of that unclear conclusion, the story did not end. Instead, it began to grow. People started to form theories, trying to explain what could have forced 9 trained hikers out of their tent in the middle of the night. One of the most discussed ideas is that a slab of snow may have shifted on the slope. Even a small movement could have made the tent feel unsafe and forced the group to leave quickly, but this idea is not accepted by everyone. The slope did not show clear signs of a large avalanche, and the footprints suggested that the hikers walked away in a controlled way, not in blind panic. Another explanation focuses on the weather. Strong wind, darkness, and extreme cold can affect judgment. In those conditions, even experienced hikers can make decisions that seem difficult to understand later from a warm room. It is possible that the group believed the tent was no longer safe, moved down toward the forest for protection, and then found it impossible to return once the cold took control of their bodies. The cedar tree suggests that some of them tried to survive after leaving the tent. A fire was made, branches were broken, and at least 2 people remained there for some time before the cold overcame them. The bodies on the slope suggest that others may have tried to return to the tent. They may have been searching for boots, clothing, or supplies that they had left behind during the sudden escape. The ravine suggests that the final 4 may have gone deeper into the forest, possibly trying to find better shelter or protection from the wind and cold. They survived longer, but not long enough. In this version of events, the story is not about a single dramatic cause. It is about a chain of conditions, decisions, and reactions that slowly led the group into a situation they could not escape. More than 60 years later, the exact moment everything changed is still unknown, and that is why the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most enduring and difficult mysteries in modern history.